Lake Mille Lacs is one of the most popular walleye fishing destinations in Minnesota. It is also one of the most regulated. For many years, the DNR has set a one-fish walleye limit for most of the spring and fall. WCCO spoke with a local bait shop owner, DNR official, and an Ojibwe tribe official about the limit and what it means for the future of the lake.
Every year we set new regulations for Mille Lacs based on what the fish population is looking like, and that results from some conversations we have with the different Ojibwe tribes that have treaty rights in Mille Lacs. And so we'll talk with them about what we think the harvest level should be for that year, the amount of pounds of fish that should come out of the lake. Once we come to an agreement on that, then the state will come back and figure out about what fishing regulations we're able to use for that year so that we stay within our share of that harvest, but also try to provide as much opportunity as we can for anglers.
Tuscan tackle has been around since 1923 from the Tut family, and we actually bought it a year ago, last December. So we've had it almost a year and a half now, and it's kind of a staple on the lake. You know, like you say, it's been there a long time. Without walleye fishing, the business doesn't exist. You know, it's definitely a staple. You know, Mille Lacs is a destination spot, and Garrison, you know, I don't know the exact population, but it's you know, 500 people or less. So, you know, a community of that size can't support a bait shop. So tourism is absolutely vital to the business, and that comes from the walleye, you know, from Mille Lacs walleyes. You know, as a young man, even I remember fishing Mille Lacs was very, very good fishing, and you could see the decline happen pretty rapidly, and that's when the brakes didn't even get tapped. The brakes got slammed on, and you know, hence all the rigs.
The tribes play a role in helping us with some of the monitoring, for one thing. They'll come over and do some electrofishing as well to sample some of those young walleye and help us to understand what the up and coming year classes are looking like. When we do those every 5-year population estimates, it's a really all hands on deck sort of an operation, and so they'll come over and help send biologists over to help us with those efforts too.
Like the state, the bands are very concerned about the walleye population in Mille Lacs Lake. The way we feel about the management is really we look to that overall safe harvest limit that's determined through our best practices of looking at the best available science. All parties, both the bands and the state, contribute to the scientific analysis that goes to put forth a safe, allowable harvest on the lake.
Well, you know, I mean, it was very common to go out there in an afternoon or evening, throw a slip bobber, you can pull a crankbait, you can literally catch as many walleyes as you wanted to catch. And that became tougher and tougher and tougher. And I remember getting to the point where, you know, if you went out in the hard months of the year, maybe July or August, you might not catch a walleye. I mean, it got pretty bad. No doubt the lake's in a better spot than it was then. In fact, fishing now is as good as I remember it. Not sure where the numbers come from. Sometimes I guess not throwing the DNR or anybody else under the bus, but sometimes I get a little skeptical of the numbers, because it sure seems like there's a ton of fish in that lake right now.
Mille Lacs is a changing system. It's been a challenge for us to manage as we've seen those changes come about. So we started to see some changes happen in the 1990s where the water started to clear up, and it's not really well understood. There's some theories about Clean Water Act and improvements to septic systems and things that reduced pollution that was going into the lake and caused it to clear. But walleye tend to prefer a little bit more cloudy water. They have special eyes that allow them to see well in sort of darker conditions, and so they are pretty well adapted to be in cloudier water, and that clearing has allowed other species like smallmouth bass to increase in population at the same time. And then we had some invasive species that got into the lake in the early 2000s. They started to show up in significant numbers. So that's both zebra mussels and spiny water flea. And those species have started to really change the ecosystem, and they're taking away energy, especially in the case of zebra mussels, where nothing really eats zebra mussels. And so that energy that used to be available for other species is being filtered out by those zebra mussels. So it's taking away potential productivity from the rest of the lake. We've seen some years where the forage is really low and the catch rates can be really high. And so when anglers are out there catching fish, some of them are catching, 30, 40, 50 fish a day for the really good anglers during those really hot bites. It's hard for them to believe that the walleye population has declined because they're seeing, in front of their eyes that they see a lot of fish. And so that's why we have both these monitoring efforts that we do every few years, plus that every 5-year mark recapture project, where that gives us a much more accurate picture of exactly how many fish are out there.
Once a safe allowable harvest is determined, then it's up to each of the individual parties, the bands and the state, to manage their fishery to stay within that poundage. That's how it's managed throughout the season.
When I was a kid and you go fishing with your grandpa, it didn't matter if the fish was 3 inches long or if it was 40 inches long, it went in the bucket. I mean, that was the bottom line. You caught a fish, you brought it home and you ate it. I think that's changed a lot. In fact, I know that's changed a lot. These younger fishermen no longer care so much about eating fish. Now it's about catching a fish, taking a picture, posting it on Instagram, posting it on Facebook, and releasing the fish. So that has dramatically changed the whole concept that I can't fish the lake because I can't keep them.
We have a Mille Lacs Fishery Advisory Council where we've got both resorts and business owners and anglers on that group as well. So we hear a lot of different things from people, and one of the things we hear is that there's multiple parties of people out there, different groups that are looking for different things. Some people want to be able to go out and harvest fish, and that's their primary reason for going fishing. And if they're not able to harvest fish, they're going to choose probably to go someplace else. And so probably for the people that want to, catch a 4 or a 6 fish limit of walleye, probably they aren't coming to Mille Lacs anymore. And the other thing that those businesses have figured out too is that it's not just about walleye fishing on Mille Lacs. The smallmouth bass fishery that I mentioned earlier is literally a world-class smallmouth bass fishery. Mille Lacs Lake a few years ago was named by Bassmasters magazine the #1 bass fishery in the country. And the reason that happened is because a big tournament of national bass anglers came up and had a tournament on Mille Lacs one year, and they couldn't believe the size of the fish that they caught and the numbers of fish that were available in that size. And the word got out really fast. And so now we see, if you go to a resort along Mille Lacs, you'll see people from Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama, people coming from hundreds of miles away to have that really unique trophy bass fishery that's there too. So I think our resorts have had to diversify a little bit. Think about other things besides just the anglers that are interested in coming up and harvesting fish, appealing to the catch and release crowd a little bit, having other amenities, other things for people to do too with families and things. And so I think that some of them had to adapt a little bit. I can't say for sure what the future is going to bring, but based on what we've seen over the last 20 to 30 years, it's going to be difficult because of the changes to the system, for one. But also just because of where Mille Lacs is, it's pretty close to the Twin Cities metro area. And so a lot of people want to fish the lake because it's probably the most accessible, close, big walleye lake that's near the Twin Cities. And so the potential is that, if we loosen restrictions too far, a lot of people can come up there and we can have a lot of hooking mortality and a lot of harvest in a fairly short amount of time. And so the ability for the state to be able to stay within a share of the harvest, is going to be pretty difficult unless that harvest is a really, really high number. And what we've seen, with the fish population since the changes have started to come about, I'm not so sure we're going to get back to that number that it was back in the 70s and 80s.
The biggest thing I can say is don't get the misconception that just because the regs say you can only keep one doesn't mean that there's not fish in that lake. That lake is absolutely full of fish. So don't be afraid to fish Mille Lacs just because you see the regs and go, oh, you can only keep one again, because there's nothing that could be further from the truth of how healthy Mille Lacs Lake is. Anybody that calls the shop and says, hey, where do I need to go? I will gladly share that information and I'll give you everything I know, but you're going to be required to come into the shop because I'm not going to tell you over the telephone. So
Jason says he's not worried about the walleye limits affecting business or turnout this season. We'll have more details on the restrictions and other important fishing information on our website at WCCO.com.